I'll see you guys in the dark.
So back in 2014, when I was 21, I was in an on and off again toxic relationship and was trying to get over him and move on, so I thought I would give dating sites a crack. I tried a few, met a few guys. Some decent that never went anywhere, and some that were just plain looking for sex or had serious issues. I hadn't dated since high school, as I'd been in 2 long-term relationships fairly close together with people that I've known for a while. As I'm sure you can imagine, I was clueless. I wasn't used to guys trying to trick me into sex, or leading me on, or even how dating really worked. How many days after the date do I have to wait until I text him? After a few failed attempts to find someone, I thought I'd broaden my horizons and really trying to find someone serious. At the time, I was talking to a couple of guys. The one that stood out was a really nice, if not slightly simple guy who I had a lot in common with. His name was Liam. I didn't want to put my eggs in one basket, so I started talking to another guy that wasn't really my type, physically or mentally, but he was smart and funny, so I thought I'd see how things played out, seeing as most of the guys that I've picked based on gut feelings turned out to be terrible. This guy I nicknamed Guy. Can't remember why, but it was a running joke between us. Was very, very persistent and very cocky, which I wasn't really into, but he seemed like a cool guy on the other hand, and was very knowledgeable, quick-witted, and easy to talk to. We spoke on the phone a few times, and it was a reasonably good experience, but there was something about him I just didn't really like. As I mentioned previously, he was quite cocky and used to do little annoying things like hang up without saying goodbye, and had an arrogant, pushy demeanor. One day on the phone, I put him up to it and told him I believed that it was all a front, and that he wasn't that arrogant, and he was a lot nicer than he let on. He told me that he had an ex-girlfriend who broke up with him because he was too much of a pushover, so he decided that women like guys that were on the arrogant side. I told him I didn't at all, and I spoke to him because I felt there was something more than that to his personality. I also picked him on little things in his profile, such as not liking fat chicks and other things. I'm a bigger girl, so I asked him if that was a problem, to which he responded that it wasn't. He had just written that to make himself look a lot better. I accepted his excuse and hoped for the best. I decided I needed to try something different, and with different kinds of men if I wanted to find someone, so I gave a guy a chance. He often suggested meeting at his place over pizza and some movies, which I wasn't quite comfortable with, so I suggested he come out to a club with a few friends, which he declined, and tried to convince me to come back to his place, which I wasn't really keen on. After he clicked on that I wasn't coming over to his house in the middle of the night, he suggested that we go out for coffee. As I didn't drive, he suggested that he would pick me up, which I didn't really think was a good idea, but agreed in the end. We decided to go to a local coffee shop that I was quite fond on, which was open throughout the night. At around 8, he picked me up, and we exchanged pleasantries, and once we were seated, I was genuinely surprised by his attentiveness and how much interest he displayed, asking me many questions about myself. Still, something didn't sit right. It wasn't that I didn't like him, there was just something that made me feel uncomfortable. All went well, we chatted about this and that, until the questioning took a strange turn. Have you ever just kissed anyone just simply because you were horny? He asked rather loudly considering we were in a crowded cafe. I was taken aback and embarrassed, and hesitated before stuttering, no, not really. I think that's more of a male thing. I can't say that I've done that. No. Sounds sexist. Shut up. I was under pressure. He then asked me a few more innocent questions before switching the topic back, asking if I liked oral sex, and other oddly worded questions that I can't remember. Sexual questions that were unusual. I lightly told him that it was rude to ask me that, but still was tolerant of him. I've encountered many douches, and at that time I felt I couldn't get much better. Not long after this, he suggested that we leave. By this, I thought he meant part ways. As you know, I had to meet up with a friend not long after coffee. I was wrong. We went to the counter, and he offered to pay, to which I declined. Luckily, he did because, ironically, I had left my wallet at home. I felt like it was such a cliche, but felt super guilty as it made me feel bad when anyone paid for me. When we got to his car, he started to drive a different direction to where I lived, which was about 5 minutes away. I asked where we were going, and he pulled up in a street nearby with little to no lights that was extremely dim and parked outside a random house. I asked him what we were doing there, and he told me he wanted to talk in private, to which I responded that we could talk in private out in front of my house. He argued that it wouldn't be private, and that people would look out the windows. I stupidly told him that no one would because only my sister was home, and I would text her not to. He kicked up a bit and got slightly angry before agreeing to take me home. This should have been enough for me, but no, I was naive and lonely. When we parked out front of my house, we started talking, and he tried to lean in to kiss me, to which I pulled away, and giving off negative body language, which still was friendly. After a bit, he started asking me to look at him, to which I just made jokes. Sometimes in stressful situations, I make jokes to clear the tension. It's kind of a bad habit. And kept my distance until he basically turned my head and kissed me. I just went with it as I was lonely and thought he wasn't that bad looking. I responded that a kiss was just a kiss. After a few seconds, I tried to pull away, and he pulled me into a bear hug to which I half-heartedly tried to get out of, but gave up and continued kissing him. A little while later, I tried to pull away, and he put me in almost a headlock type hold. Still somehow, I wasn't concerned enough to get out of there. We stopped kissing after a little bit and continued talking. He asked if I'd sit in the back seat with him to cuddle, to which I hesitantly said yes. Once we got in the back, we cuddled and talked, but then he kept grabbing my boobs and my vagina. I kept telling him to stop because it was pissing me off. He was doing it in a jokey way, like, whoops, I accidentally brushed your boob. I didn't take it too seriously until it happened a few times, and I told him that he had his feel, and enough was enough. I wasn't good at saying no to men back then, not that it's an excuse. After a couple of times, I said I was moving the other side of the car so he couldn't touch me. I sat there and we continued talking when all of a sudden he reached out and pulled me in for a cuddle. He was playing with my hair when all of a sudden he pushed my head down, hair wrapped in his hands. I was confused and tried to push my head back up, but when he roughly pushed it down again, I realized what he was doing. I don't know how I did it. The guy was around 6'2" and about 120 kilograms, but I managed to get myself out of his grip and get out of the car. As I was getting out, he yelled out to come back, that he didn't do anything. You know what you fucking did. Thanks for the coffee, I said as I slammed his door in his face. I walked quickly but steadily to my front door even though I was petrified, as I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me running. He continued yelling out that he had done nothing wrong the whole time I was walking. I banged down my front door, and my younger sister opened it, to see me in tears. I told her what happened. Eventually, I settled down. I swiftly blocked him on Facebook and vowed never to talk to him again. I kid you not, 3 days later while at work, I received a text from him. Hey, you want to get coffee tonight? No. Why? Reply then. After an hour of no response. I see what you did there, smiley face. I'm just curious, why'd you even bother asking? Because I think that you're cute. I'm curious as to why you're answering. Sends pictures that read, you smell like hidden motives. Get away from me. Pretty sure my motives tasted fine when my tongue was down your throat the other night. I never made contact again after that and blocked his number. A few years on, I was telling someone about him and decided to unblock him on Facebook to show her when I noticed that I now had a mutual friend. The mutual friend was a girl I had been extremely close with in high school, who confessed to me that she had been assaulted from a child onward. I was the only one she had ever told, and I told her to find the courage to put the piece of shit away, so naturally I freaked and messaged her. I told her the whole story, and she was stunned. She told me that he worked with her, and now lectured something to do with justice at a local university, which was laughable. She told me that he had harassed her for months about going on a date with him, and would occasionally get quite nasty. And all the time she knew him, she felt uncomfortable around him even when he was nice. She felt kinda intimidated most times. He would guilt, pressure, and have a go at her about his date or not messaging back, etc. Very full on, almost stalkerish. She ended up getting a boyfriend, and he was furious. She didn't hear from him after that. Judging by our time frames, she met him around 3 to 6 months after I did. For some background information, I live in a small apartment complex right outside my campus with some friends of mine. I'm also a 20-year-old female, so all my friends were always bashing on me for never meeting up with any boys or going. I had gotten sick of it. I didn't want to be the little friend who stayed home and ate pizza while my friends were out on dates with boys. So I signed up for Plenty of Fish. Now I'm not the type of person who would say yes to any random stranger. They had to be nice looking, they had to have plenty of photos of themselves, and we both had to have at least 2 things of interest. So, with those things in my head, I psyched myself up to join the world of online dating. Within a few days, I already had 2 boys I was talking to. One said he was a doctor, kind of hard to believe because he was only 20, and one said he worked as a construction guy, easier to believe. I didn't like that the doctor guy was lying to me. One day, as I was getting crap from my roommates, the construction guy, who we can call Dan, messaged me on a messaging app that we were using and asked if I wanted to go out for a bite to eat. I told my roommates where I was going and who I was with. You know, all the things someone would do so someone knows if you've been abducted. I even had a check-in time so that when my roommates texted me if things were good, I had to say some silly code word that meant things were good. If I responded another code word, it meant help me, get me out of this. If I didn't use code words, then she would call the police for help. So I quickly dolled myself up and got ready for my date. I put my hair up in a classy bun, leaving strips of it hanging down around my glasses. I put on a nice white blouse and some black pants, and I was ready to go. I jumped in my car and headed out to the restaurant where Dan had chosen. It was just out of my town, but it was still only about 15 minutes away from my apartment. I arrived at the restaurant and saw him almost immediately. He was wearing nice clothes and just looked like his photos. He was waiting just outside the restaurant doors for me. His eyes lit up when they saw me. He walked over to me and smiled. We chatted a little bit outside, since it was summer and not cold, and then walked inside. We ate dinner and talked about our life, things like how school was going. I got the text from my friend, but since everything was all good, I sent that code word back. Dan talked about how much he liked his job and things, and altogether, it was pretty nice. Except for one thing, Dan was boring. He didn't do anything exciting, really talk enthusiastic about anything, and it was just boring. It was an average date, and I honestly didn't care to go on any more. The next day I woke up to the feeling of my phone vibrating nonstop. I looked at it and realized it was vibrating so much that it had fallen off my dresser. I almost laughed. Then I saw all the messages where they were from Dan. At first, they were all saying how much fun he had, and that he would really like to go out again. But then the messages took a turn. They got violent and angry that I wasn't responding to him. It was 7 in the freaking morning. I was asleep. I noped out of that situation, texted him back, and said that I'd been sleeping, and that no, I was not going on any more dates with him. I was just about to block his profile on both sites when I got a final message. Watch your back. At first, I was really creeped out, but then I thought that since I had him blocked and all my accounts were deleted, he could do nothing. Later that day, I saw a text from a random number, telling me how pretty I looked in my blue PJs. I glanced outside just in time to see none other than Dan running down my road. How the hell did he get my number? I thought wearily. I blocked that number and continued what I was doing. Later that night, I fell asleep pretty early and woke up to my phone text alert going crazy. It was from the number I had just blocked earlier that day. There were dozens of messages saying how I was going to get it. I quickly showed all my roommates the messages. They told me that I should go to the police, but since I was stupid, I didn't. I blocked the number again and went back to sleep. But once again, I woke up to my phone buzzing. I didn't wait. I jumped in my car and drove all the way down to the police station. Once there, they told me that they couldn't do much to help me and just told me to block the number. I did. At least I had it on record. Nothing happened for a few days. The number stayed blocked on my phone for a little while. But then the pictures started. They were pictures of my house, of me in my house, my car, my work. I went back to the police, and finally, I was able to get a restraining order against Dan. I never received any messages from Dan again after that. I now never use dating websites. So, Dan, I hope that we never meet again. Years ago, when I was about 13, I made a post on Craigslist advertising babysitting services as a way to make some money. The morning after I made the post, I got a phone call from a man supposedly interested in hiring. As soon as I heard his voice, I got an anxious feeling. He was whispering very low and kind of slow the entire time. It was extremely off-putting. Sounded like he was middle-aged. So we exchanged hellos, and he says that he's calling about and asks what I'm charging. He asks my name, all sorts of weird questions. So anyways, he says he has a young son for whom he needs a babysitter. Then he begins asking me about my experience, and then strangely diving into overly lengthy descriptions of his own life. I don't remember the details of the conversation, but I do remember one thing. He asks extremely clearly, "Now, my son, sometimes he likes to touch himself. That wouldn't bother you, would it?" In his creepy, low, slow voice. I just remember being filled with anxiety at that and wanting to hang up immediately. It was just sort of beyond TMI. His voice and tone really made it a lot worse. He sounded serious, but at this point, I was partially convinced that this was some sort of prank, and I was almost certain he didn't have a kid. I had no idea how to respond to that, and even though this was on the phone, me being a stupid and at that point a petrified 13-year-old kid, I just responded with, "No," and I'm sure he realized how nervous I sounded because he just kind of gave a low chuckle and continued on. Because you know how little boys are. Honestly, a lot of details of that conversation are blurred, and it went by fairly quickly. I just remember kind of nodding off and yesing my way to the end when he asked my availability and said he would give a call back. He ended with, "Okay, thanks," with a little chuckle and hung up. I can't remember whether he gave me his info or not, but I am pretty sure he did not call back. I do remember jumping onto my computer and taking my ad down as soon as possible. I felt like complete crap after that phone call, and wondered whether that was a normal discussion for an adult to try and have with a potential child babysitter. Definitely glad I never met this dude. Terrible vibes just through the phone. I really love Craigslist. I'd estimate that I've met maybe 300 people from buying or selling stuff. And for the most part, everyone was nice and harmless. However, I did run into 2 creeps who made me rethink meeting strangers alone to sell stuff. FYI, I was in my early 20s at the time. The first guy, it's 2009, and I'm staying with my parents for the Christmas holiday in a small town in Florida. I'm going through my childhood room and cleaning out the closet and find a giant CD holder full of maybe 100 really shitty CDs. It's the 21st century. No one uses CDs anymore. I figured I'd try to sell the CDs on Craigslist. I put up a listing, 100 CDs from the late 90s and early mid-2000s, mix of pop and rock, all for $35 or best offer. The next day I get an email from a guy named John around 2 p.m. He says that he's in town temporarily and that he wants the CDs. He says he can pick them up after dinner around 8. I email him back my address and number and tell him to text or call when he's on his way. 8 p.m. comes around. I figure I've been stood up, which happens often on Craigslist. No big deal. My dad works for a liquor distribution company and would often do demonstration nights at restaurants and bars and would come home at bar closing time. This night, he gets home at around 3 a.m. I'm in college and a total night owl, so I'm still up probably eating junk food, surfing the web, watching horror flicks. I hear a car pull up. I look out the window and see him sitting in his car eating food. He often stops at Taco Bell on his way home and eats it in his car so my mom doesn't know he's cheating on his diet. Maybe 10 minutes later, my dad comes in and shouts my name. "There is someone here to see you. Can you please tell me why a stranger is showing up at my house at 3 a.m.? Huh? I run downstairs and my dad says some guy pulled up in the driveway and asked for me by name. I walk outside with my dad, and this guy is with maybe mid-30s gets out of his car. He says he's the Craigslist guy who wanted to buy my CDs. My dad goes back in the house. I tell the guy it's really, really late to just be stopping by, especially without texting first. However, since I'm awake, I go and grab the CDs. He then proceeds to drone on and on about why he's buying the CDs. He says he's engaged to a woman he loves very much, and all he wants to do is make her happy. He said that last week, someone broke into her car and stole all of her CDs. She was really upset and wanted to make it up to her. He looked on Craigslist and found my listing and was really excited because I had a bunch of CDs she used to have. Weird thing is, I didn't list any of the artists or bands because I was lazy, but I didn't think about that at the time. Anyway, he said he was getting it for her as a Christmas gift. He said he was staying with his future in-laws somewhere nearby and their family barbecue ran really late, which is why he never made it at 8 p.m. At this point, I've lost interest and say something along the lines of, "That's sweet. Next time, you should probably call or text the Craigslist instead of just showing up." I hand him the CDs, he hands me the cash, and I go back inside. 3 days later, I start getting texts from an unknown number. "Hey, I don't know my way around this town. Care to tour guide? I could really use a massage. Where can I get a massage in this town? You're Asian, do you massage? Would you take $40 for an hour? Happy ending?" Me. "Who the hell is this?" "Oh, I'm sorry. I bought the CDs from you the other day. Do you squirt?" I didn't respond, obviously. I show my friends that night and we laugh it off. Then the next day I get more texts. "I still have your address. I'm at the Bank of America near your neighborhood. I just got the 40, babe. Only 3 minutes away. Are you home? You fucking cunt, stop ignoring me. I'm almost there." I immediately run downstairs to tell my dad and mom. It was nighttime, so we shut off all the lights outside and inside the house. My mom, little brother, and I went in my parents' room in the back of the house. My dad hid behind the curtains of the front bay window with a shovel in his hand. A few minutes later, I heard him run down the front hallway, fling the front door open, and run outside. We heard some faint shouting, so we all walked out of the bedroom. By that time, my dad came back in with his shovel, his face red and his hair disheveled. Apparently, the guy came driving down our street really slow. My dad recognized the car and went running outside with the shovel, yelling obscenities at the guy. The guy peeled off and never came back or texted me again. The second guy. I was moving from Florida to DC, and I was going to load up my car as much as I could with stuff. However, I lived on the 3rd floor, plus a bit of a walk from my assigned parking spot, so I figured I could use some help. I posted an ad on Craigslist. I said I was looking for someone to help me load some heavy stuff, like TVs, desks, etc. in my car. Less than an hour's worth of work, and I'd pay $45. I'd give the very first responder my number and address. He shows up. He was probably about 5'8", 350 pounds of pure fat. The sweat and smell coming off this guy in the Florida heat was pretty nauseating, but I didn't care as long as he did the job right. While he was carting heavy stuff, I was loading lighter things. Whenever I'd go upstairs to grab another load, he'd hurry up after me so he could walk to the stairs behind me. I had the door propped open so he didn't have to worry about me needing to unlock the door for him or anything. When he'd follow me upstairs, he made these weird grunting noises like, mm-hmm, but I assumed it was because he was out of shape. Eventually everything's loaded properly, save for some sweat smears on my stuff. I pay him and he drives off. I go back in my place to finish loading and cleaning. I go about 45 minutes later to put another load in my car, and I see his truck is back, parked across the street from mine. He's sitting in the driver's seat, looking at me. When he sees me notice him, he looks away. I walk over to his window and knock. He rolls it down and asks if I need help or if it was lost, and I ask if he needs help or if he was lost. I was really confused as to why he had come back, and I knew he didn't live near here. He didn't say anything, just rolled his window back up and drove off. Okay, whatever. Of course, 5 minutes later, my phone starts blowing up. I don't recognize the number, so I don't answer the calls. Then texts start rolling in. Him, I bet you taste salty and sweet. Me, who is this? Him, your pussy. Him, what are you up to tonight? I can come back over. I get the sinking feeling it's the Craigslist guy. He had never called me about the job when I gave him my number, so I didn't know what his number was. Him, I like your pink panties. Then I realized he was looking at my dress when I was walking up the stairs. I immediately feel like a total idiot for wearing a dress that day. He then started dialing my number over and over again. I didn't know how to block numbers through Sprint, so I had to just turn my phone off. Later, I was with my guy friend grabbing a bite and turned my phone back on. I got another text from the guy about how he wanted to toss me around like a rag doll and tie me up and make me beg for it. I show the text to my friend and tell him the story. The Craigslist creep then proceeds to start blowing up my phone again. So my friend answers and says he is going to cut his dick off and feed it to his dog if he ever contacts me again. I moved the next day, so I never had to worry about him randomly showing up in his truck again. Since then, I've bought and sold stuff on Craigslist, but I always make sure people meet me at a public place. I also stalk people's email addresses, Google Plus accounts, and etc. Not too long ago, I put up a post on Craigslist asking to either sell or trade my fish tank for a smaller one. I put in my phone number as a contact source and asked to text only. After a couple of hours, I got a text from somebody who was willing to trade. We agreed to meet at a Walmart in a couple of days when we were both free and do our trade. During those days, the guy kept on texting me, involving a small talk. He asked me about my name and where I worked, etc., and me being foolish, answered this. I used Craigslist often, and I had never really had a bad experience with anyone, so I never really thought this guy was weird. I saw him more like friendly. I told this guy what car I drove and what college I went to again, never really stopping to think what kind of info I was giving to a total stranger. When the day came to meet this guy, he told me he could only meet after 10 p.m. I thought that was odd, but agreed to meet him anyway since my poor fish were already stuck in a 5-gallon jug. So me and my boyfriend drove to the Walmart at about 10:15 and got there in about 20. The guy texted me and said he was already there in an old yellow Camaro. I replied saying we were both two in a gray van. He then texted me and said, "Who is we?" At that moment, I realized something was really off with this guy, and I replied by saying, "My husband and me." That was a lie, but I felt he should know I wasn't alone. He never responded after that text. My boyfriend and I went to the parking lot a couple of times looking for the yellow Camaro, but we never found it. I tried calling the guy, and he ignored my calls. We decided it was best to just leave. I don't know what could have happened if I met this creepy guy by myself, or even with my boyfriend there, but I have a feeling it would have not been something good. I removed the post from Craigslist that night and saved the creep's phone number just in case he tried contacting me again. A couple of weeks later, I got a text from several different phone numbers asking about the tank. I never responded to anybody because I believe it was the same guy since I, for one, deleted the post immediately. I hope he can't somehow track my phone, and of course, I'm not using Craigslist ever again. So I'd just gotten out of a pretty significant relationship with someone of 4 years, nearly engaged and moving in together. When things fell apart, I took a good amount of time to be on my own and get my shit together again. When my friends began encouraging me to get back out there, needless to say, I really wasn't wanting anything at that point, nor looking for anything. I really wasn't wanting to do anything at that point, but they insisted that I at least just go out on a few casual dates for practice, just to kind of get my skills back up for when I was ready. I think they were honestly just worried because I became quite hermetic. So I matched with this girl who's home from college for summer. She's a little out of the way for me, but was eager to meet. Seemed really interested, was even willing to come to my area. I really wasn't all that interested, to be truthful, but my friends again encouraged this. You know, practice. A date doesn't mean commitment, whatever. I want to be very clear, though, that I was extremely honest and explicit with her that I was not looking for anything serious, or anything really at all. I was very forthcoming that I had gotten out of something serious, and I was just kind of encouraged to explore. She persisted and still wanted to meet, so we agreed to a casual lunch in a sports bar that week. I got there, and she was already waiting for me. I was a bit put off by how much different she looked than her pictures. Not trying to sound shallow or anything, but her pictures from Tinder easily had to be at least 5 years old, which I verified based on tattoos she had in person, versus ones she didn't in pictures. So I was a bit thrown off by that. I wasn't the least bit attracted to her, but I was there just to have new experiences anyway, right? No big deal. I felt so bad, because the entire time she seemed so incredibly shy and awkward. I even noticed her hand shaking when she reached for a glass, which I found endearing, honestly. So I did my best to get her talking and try to help her feel more relaxed. I asked her questions and chatted about things I figured you chat about on dates. Where she grew up, music she's into, school she goes to, her major, all that other stuff. All to which I literally received one-word answers. It went on like this for about an hour, and she was just not working with me at all. But I tried to keep room in my heart, because it was clear she was feeling anxious, and I understand on a personal level. Then she pulls out this book and says, "I got this for you." And I responded very grateful, thanking her and inquiring what it was about. Because hey, if someone wants to share a good read with me, I'm all for that. She looks at me funny and says in a very sudden but odd tone, "You're kidding, right?" I'm very confused and just kind of look at her like, "What?" And she says, "This is your favorite book. You told me this was your favorite book." To which I said, "No, I have never even heard of this before." So we concluded that she ultimately got me confused with someone else she must have been chatting with, which I honestly found hilarious. She was embarrassed, but I made light of it and said it sounded funny. Because I get it. That's Tinder culture, I guess. So as we finished lunch, and I'm still receiving one-word answers despite our funny moment, I kind of become a bit suggestive that we should conclude our date by saying I had to get back to feed my animals and do some laundry. But she came very adamant on spending more time, and asked if we would do something else. I was genuinely trying to be a decent person, so I agreed, and we found a nearby park to walk, and that's where shit got weird. We sat on a park bench. Mind you, it's broad daylight. There's kids playing basketball nearby. Folks are jogging past us. I start trying to make conversation yet again, but still get the one-word answers. Then out of seemingly nowhere, without any warning whatsoever, she proceeds to just kiss me really aggressively, tongue and everything. I was honestly just so shocked I stood there frozen, not knowing what to do. I had this timid, shy woman who's really not made much conversation at all, who was just so nervous she was visibly shaking, just turned into a freaking bear mauling my face in like 10 seconds. My head was spinning with confusion and anxiety, and I swear it felt like it lasted forever, and I just prayed for it to stop. I was so put off, and honestly a bit afraid to do or say anything about it. Like, what do you even do in a situation? I was just hoping she'd pick up on my very obvious body language, that I wasn't reciprocating anything at all. I was completely unprepared for a situation like this. Then some really nasty guy just walks by, gawking and catcalling, and literally begins propositioning us into a three-way. And I'm just like, what the hell is going on? I need to get out of here. I was 1,000 different types of uncomfortable at this point. I end up managing to ward him off after telling him very politely, no, more than several times, all the while she's just laughing. And I'm thinking, who even are you? Dr. Jekyll? Mr. Hyde? Over here? What the hell? So he leaves, and I'm insisting now that I need to leave and just go home. She seems to ignore what I'm saying and just gets very close to my face again and says, "Did you like that? Do you think I'm sexy? Do you want me?" When I tell you I was so fucking nervous, I was like, I really need to go home. And she was like, "Can I come?" And I told her very firmly no. She literally tried to persuade me to let her come back to my place with me, and I had to say no more than 3 times. So finally I'm home, and frankly just kind of shaken up. I hadn't really done the dating thing in quite a long time, but that felt very abnormal to me. She then texts me after she gets home and asks me out on a second date, and I was very kind, despite being incredibly uncomfortable. And I told her that I thought she was a cool chick, and I had a nice time, but I did not feel anything there. I reminded her I wasn't looking for anything. She then text-bombed me a bunch of crazy shit, saying how she didn't understand and was so confused, that she thought I was so into her and that things went great. I didn't respond to any of these because now she's continuing to cross my boundaries. I said what I needed to say, and I thought I was being decent, at least by being honest. So the texts continue, and I figured they're going to eventually stop, because it was our first date. How can someone be so upset over someone not reciprocating on a first date? They didn't stop it though. By the text, you would have thought she just ended a 2-year relationship, and she began calling, at which point I had to block her number. So Nightmare Tinder girl, please, for the love of everything, let's not ever meet again. This happened a few months ago. So I love nootropics. I suffered from diet-related brain fog for most of my life without realizing, so anything that will allow me to perform better and think more clearly was a huge interest to me. One of those things being microdosing LSD. You know, like in Silicon Valley. If the smartest people are doing this, why not I? Unfortunately, I had been running a little behind schedule. I had arranged to meet up with a foreign student studying in my city. She was due to arrive at the bus stop at any time, so every second counted for me. With rational thinking being a non-existent concept, I, an absolute buffoon, made the newbie error of not measuring the piece of LSD that I snipped off from the tab. Fast forward about 10 minutes, and I'm on my way to meet her at the bus stop. As I sat on the seat, gazing off into the horizon, I slowly started to lose perception of time. After another 10 minutes, a bus pulled up in which my date had got off. We introduced each other properly, and there was no awkwardness at all. I previously packed a J, with the plan being for us to get high, go to my place and chill. We walked and talked for a few minutes as we climbed a hill, heading towards an empty bench situated central of a grassy field, overlooking miles of the city suburbs. After we finally sat down, I sparked it up, and we continued. We spoke about different countries and cultures, our backgrounds, etc. She mentioned she had Mongol in her, to which she talked about the Empire and other historical stuff. About 20 minutes in, I started grabbing her face. I don't know why, but I just wanted to touch it. Remembering her Mongol background, I started pushing her eyes up to make her look Asian. For whatever damn reason, I started to repeat Chinese. Yes, I know they're unrelated, but that didn't stop me. What began as a great start became extreme awkwardness. The combo of the weed and acid threw my ability to speak and comprehend English. In fact, the only thing I could comprehend was the idea of a black hole absorbing matter and spitting it out into 1D pixels. If you may, you could still use those pixels, were more or less what was left of my ability to communicate. After another 20 minutes of what felt like endless silence, people began to appear. What looked to me like a zombie apocalypse was actually several dog walkers appearing in synchronicity with one another. We got up and rushed to leave, taking a little detour to avoid the zombie humans. As we walked through the valley, I began to appreciate how artistic everything looked. Sure, it seemed like the rapture began early, but everything felt like it was perfectly directed, as if I were watching a film. None of this to me was real. We got to my place to find out that my dad hadn't gone to work. The call out he expected to receive didn't happen. The whole plan for the night began to spiral even further into oblivion. I attempted to introduce them a level of English compared to a toddler. After she sat down on the sofa, her and my dad engaged what seemed to be an even more awkward conversation, while I left for the kitchen to try and get myself some water. Spent about 15 minutes with my hands on my head like a complete lunatic, while vivid images flew across my mind. Next thing I know, she walks in and sees me. We both assumed I was having some sort of panic attack while I still had no clue I was actually tripping on acid. We went back into the living room where I sat with my face in my hands. My dad and her continued to awkwardly converse, while the dog helped distract my dad from the "how did you two meet" question. We ended up heading upstairs into my room. After 2 hours of hardcore tripping out, I somehow concluded that I had taken too much acid. I grabbed a pen off my desk and began etched out the 3 letters that would explain a lot. LSD. About 15 seconds after I began to make sense to her, I began to feel queasy. I bolted up and waddled to the sink as fast as I could, before releasing what felt like an entire intestinal tract. After exiting my bowels via my oral orifices, my ability to comprehend basic language began to return. We laid down in bed for a good few hours, me on the brink of falling asleep, her talking while I tuned in. I believe I woke up the next day, my head still very groggy, with insatiable thirst. As I climbed the ladder of my bed, I noticed she left me a little message. "Hope you had a good trip," it said. I couldn't believe what I had experienced wasn't just a dream. It was so surreal, as if an animation in which someone had screwed with the contrast. What was supposed to be a get high and watch Jurassic Park and chill moment turned into a tripping balls and being babysat in front of my own father. This happened about a year ago. I had Tinder, and I made a promise to myself to never meet up with anyone. I had used it simply to boost my self-esteem a little bit, and not feel so gross. One day I see someone that I knew. He was my brother's friend, and had even been to my house a couple of times when we were younger. We matched, and I thought, oh wow, cool. We started talking, and everything seemed just fine. He asked a couple of times if we could meet up and go for a drink or get coffee sometime. And whenever someone asked this, I would always dodge the question. One day I'm finishing up babysitting some kids and make a decent amount of cash. He sends me a message asking if I wanted to go get some drinks platonically. So I figured, what the hell, worst comes to worst, I get to get out of the house for a little bit. He gets to my house and waits outside my door. We walk to his car and he even opens up the door. John tells me we're going to a local suburb to go to some good bars and get to know each other. Everything is going well. He's relatively charming and very goofy. He makes a comment that I'm very quiet. When he arrives at the bar, some of his friends were there, and we all hang out as a group, which makes me feel even better. We drink a little bit and hop to another bar. As we drive there, he wants to play 21 questions, which is code for "I'm a douche who is about to ask you if you're a virgin like we're 12. John starts to ask the questions that we would all imagine comes up, and I answer, because whatever. We're all adults here, but I don't have any flirtatious tone. I speak very sternly. He asks if I ever had a massage, and I say no. And he says, "Oh, I'll give you one if you'd like." I tell him that I'm okay, but he proceeds to put his hands on my knee and roams around. I push him off and say no thank you. We go to the bar, and I'm very uncomfortable. And I have anxiety, so I decide at this point that I'm going to entertain him a little longer, as we just walked in and asked to go home in a little bit. I mentioned that I like chicken nuggets at some point, and he offers to get me some. I go up for a cigarette, and yes, he comes with, and I very quickly put my hand up and tell him that I would rather not. He persists, and I continue to tell him no. We go to McDonald's across the street from my school, and I eat 2 McNuggets, and I'm ready to go home because he is giving me weird vibes. John then asks, want to go drifting to the school parking lot, which made me laugh so hard in my head. I say no, and he says, no, it'll be fun. I'll show you. We start drifting, and I say a couple more times that I am ready to go home, and then he says that he won't take me unless I give him a kiss. I tell him no, and he says that it's too cold for me to walk, so I may as well do it. I'm very uncomfortable, so I offered my cheek, and he persists and says that he meant that he wants to make out. I state that I don't want to, and he locks the door. I very quickly kiss him as I don't know what I'm supposed to do in this situation, and he grabs me and lets his hand roam around again. I push him off and tell him maybe next time I will kiss him the way he wants. He takes me home, and I cry the rest of the night. I told my brother, and he immediately told me that he heard John was a creep and has issues with the word no. I'm glad I got home safe, but I know now I will never go out with someone from Tinder. I thought I would be safe because I technically knew the person, but I was very wrong. I blocked him on all social media and haven't heard from him since. Unfortunately, this was the second occasion something awful like this has happened to me. John, I hope that we never meet ever again. I live in a small village in the very north of Scotland, so large shops and resources are a far distance. For that reason, I usually rely on internet shopping to get my needs. I needed to buy a bag for when I leave for university. One better than the one I already have. So I turned to Craigslist as I normally do. After looking for a short while, I came across a really good looking bag at only 15 pounds. I thought this was an absolute steal, so I phoned the seller. Immediately what struck me was the guy's accent. It was obvious that he wasn't Scottish, or even from the UK. He sounded Polish or something. He said he was from Glasgow. That's at least 5 hours by car from where I live. But when I told him the area I was from, he reluctantly offered to come by my house to give it to me. This all seemed strange because the sale was only 15 pounds. Nonetheless, I gave him my address. He said he'd drop by later on that day. Skipping forward about 7 hours to about 10 p.m., I was thinking that he wasn't going to come, but around 10:20 there was a chap on the door. Surprised that it was so late, I looked out the window to the front door, and sure enough, it was a young guy standing with a bag in his hand. Slightly relieved that it wasn't a robber, I went to the door and opened up. It was the guy from the phone for sure. The accent confirmed it. He said, "Hey, here it is." I smiled and took out my wallet, taking about 30 pounds because of the trouble he went to come here in and the condition of the bag. He smiled and opened his arms as if he wanted a hug. Being a gay guy, I rarely turned down a hug and just assumed it was a cultural thing. So I hugged him and he left. I was still confused that he came all this way just for 15 pounds, but I didn't find it overly strange. At around midnight, I was finished around another episode of 24 and was ready to go to bed. From outside the house, I heard a car door shut. I paused the TV and went over to the window to see who it was. I recognized the car as being the green sedan that the guy had. But he wasn't there. No one was. It was at that point when I heard the back gate opening. I nearly shat myself. I ran quietly to the kitchen where the back door is, staying low down the way there to avoid whoever it was seeing me from the kitchen window. I usually don't lock both doors till I go to bed, so both were still unlocked. I grabbed the key from the counter and quickly locked the door. As I did, I got a fright at the security light turning on in the backyard. I looked up to see that it was him again. He had a creepy smile on his face. No teeth showing. Just a smile. I stood up and shouted, "Whoa, dude, what the hell are you doing back there?" He said nothing, and just smiled, looking directly at me. I found myself just staring at him until the situation actually kicked in, and I took the keys from the back door and bolted to the front. About halfway to the front door, I heard the window smash in the kitchen. My stomach ached at the fact that he had already making his way into the house. I made a turn to go upstairs and towards the toilet so I could lock myself in there. When in the toilet, I heard him stumbling and breaking glass, falling to the floor. He was now in my house. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and quickly dialed 999. Told them of the situation as fast as I could, and they said they'll get the officers out there as fast as they could. The police station was just up from my village, so I knew someone would be here generally quick. The operator asked me to stay on the phone until someone arrived. I was focused on the guy's footsteps, which would slow down and speed up every so often. He eventually walked upstairs and tried to open the bathroom door. When he realized it was locked, he said, "Ah, I know you're in there, Cameron." Hearing him say my name made my stomach churn. I screamed, "The police are coming! Just back the fuck off, man!" After saying that, he started to kick the door. I backed up against it with more strength than I knew I had. Then in the distance, I heard the sirens and the blue lights reflecting from the bathroom window. He continued to kick the door, but then I heard the car doors outside open and fast footsteps. I heard the front door open, and then a police officer with a taser yelled, "Drop the knife." Again, I felt sick knowing he had a knife. It sounded as if he started running back downstairs. Then I heard a taser, and the guy screaming. Then a thump. After he came through, they officially arrested him for attempting murder and trespassing. I have pressed charges, but the fact is, he won't get any more than 7 months in jail. After that, he will be free to come right back. I am now trying to sell my house to get out of here as fast as possible. So I've been on Grindr for about 10 years, and have had plenty of fucked up experiences. This one in particular reminds me of when I was at a party without my car, and my phone was on 10%, but a decently hot Grindr guy said he would pick me up, and we could hang out at his place before he drove me home, so of course I jumped on the opportunity. Anyway, we got to his place, and he got me pretty drunk, but never tried to make a move. I assumed he was going to wait and just convince me to stay the night later. Finally, my phone died after like 2 hours, and I didn't even have to say anything before he noticed it was dead. Then he stood up and was like, "Well, let's go to the car then." When I asked if he had a charger I could use, he said no. After we got in the car, he kinda got quiet and less flirty, and I spaced out, just enjoying his music and looking out the window. I didn't even notice that he never asked where I lived until I realized we'd been driving for over an hour. Not even towards my town, but into the canyons. And I asked where he was going, and he just said, "Thought we could go for a drive." And my drunk ass was like, "Oh, okay." So anyway, to make a long story shorter, he ended up taking us 4 or 5 miles down a dirt road with no signs or houses until it dead-ended into this cabin with no lights on or cars outside. And he parked and turned off the car. That's when the dread started to creep in as I sobered up. I said I drank too much and should probably head home, but he didn't even respond to that. He just sat there, staring at the cabin. Then he was like, "You said you like being kinky? You're pretty submissive, correct?" And I was like, sure, but I just meant like normal, rough kind of shit, nothing wild." And he started sounding a little annoyed, and his sentences seemed a little less carefully worded, like he was getting spit at. And he started sounding a little annoyed, and his sentences seemed a little less carefully worded, like he was just spitting out the bare minimum of each thought. He said something about how some of his favorite people are those who can find pleasure in pain, and like if someone goes into shock enough times, eventually it becomes like a drug, and they crave more. Then something about how pushing a person into the deep end is the fastest way to teach them to swim. At that point, I was scared enough to assert myself, and said firmly, Okay, well that sounds fun, but just not tonight. I just want to go home now. This place is creepy. And he just sighed and gripped his keys tighter. Then, right as I glanced at his phone sitting in the cup holder, right before it occurred to me to grab it, he snatched it up so fast and held it in his hand, kind of behind his head to make clear he wasn't going to let me near it. I made this kind of "wah" sound, and he just gave me this almost "I'm proud of you, son," half like dads do when they pat their shoulder or something. It was quiet, and he kept looking me up and down for a minute or so, and then got a little more gruff and said, "Let's go inside. I have these friends you'll really like once you meet them. You'll feel a lot better," or something to the extent, but he wasn't even trying to sound genuine or comforting like he's been doing so well earlier in the night. Finally I lied and spoke up a bit and told my roommate and my friends I was meeting up with you before you picked me up. I sent screenshots of your face and some of the conversation. They're gonna freak out if I don't charge my phone and reply to them in the next few hours. I tried not to make it sound accusatory, but more like I was just worried about my friends going crazy. But it was clear he knew what I was implying. At that point, he let out an exasperated, grunty sigh and started the car and drove away. Driving back, I got nervous about him stalking me and coming after me in the future, so I tried to apologize and tell him I'd be down to hang another time maybe, but tonight just wasn't great for me. He didn't say a single word. He drove the whole way back and didn't ask where I lived, but dropped me off at a McDonald's about 40 miles away from my apartment. And when I was stepping out of the car, he suddenly leaned over and gave me a hard shove, so I almost fell out the rest of the way. And he grabbed my backpack off the floor and flung it out his window across the parking lot and peeled out with the passenger door still open. Broke my laptop and cracked my phone, and I had to ask a stranger to use her charger and call an Uber. But at that point, I was just so anxious to get home, I didn't give a shit anymore. What's so weird is how, while it was happening, even though I was terrified, I guess, I wasn't thinking about exactly what he was planning to do with me. I just knew I needed to get away from him. So it wasn't until I got home and got in the shower that I realized how fucked it all was, and what might have happened if I'd let him talk me into walking into that cabin and all that stuff. I remember just being so shaken and smacked by the reality of it. Almost felt like a panic attack, so I sat down in the shower with my head between my knees and cried till it ran cold. And I got out and woke my roommate up to tell him about it, and he kind of calmed me down. So while I still have a Grindr account, I really just use it as an ego boost. I'm reluctant to meet up with anybody from it now. Anyway, girls and guys, I suppose the moral of the story is we gotta be goddamn careful out there.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.